Carla is a multi-award-winning founder and managing director of Safety Rocks Limited, where she specializes in transforming traditional tick box safety training into engaging experiences that drive culture change. Nice. Looking forward to seeing that. Frustrated by generic industry standards, she's developed an innovative. I can never say that word, but you know what it means, don't you? That one. And cross-section training solutions for global organizations ranging from motorsport and defense, healthcare, and engineering. Her impact has been recognized with prestigious accolades, including being named 2025 Health and Safety Training MD of the Year by SMN News. Well done, Carla, mate.
Okay, so I just wanted to pick up from Davey. Davey, thank you so much. I was trying to do my timing to make sure that we actually definitely had the 12 minutes. And Davey, once an Olympian, always an Olympian. So thank you very much. And welcome back after your break, everybody. I just want to try to say, well, trying to give myself a bit of an opportunity to say thank you to the people who have come before. So Davey, for example, bringing all that lovely energy into the room and also talking about things like empowerment, and Louise, all the conversations around defense cognition, and I think they're all really important. And basically, the whole entirety of today has been about behaviors, and how, when we're thinking about how we can make 2026 the safest year yet, some of the things that we want to be looking at is also thinking about how we deal with people in the workplace just in general. And Davey has picked up on that. Kristen talked about it at the beginning, and Louise has also talked about it too. And I've thought about different types of things that people have said. So Davey was talking about disconnect. He was also talking about caring and influence and empowerment. And it all leads so nicely on to what we're going to be talking about now. So, what I thought we'd talk about today is to talk about how we can look at behavioral polarization within the workplace. So, again, when we're thinking about human behavior, incredibly important. So, if we made gains in developing, really robust policy in organizations, we feel that we're culturally mature, we still have an issue with the people. Now, people are our most precious asset, but they can also be our biggest problem. So, I'm Carla Crocombe. I'm founder and managing director of Safety Rocks Limited, and we have been developing truly tailored training for nearly 11 years now. And we are the partner, the official health and safety training partner for Motorsport UK. And like David said, we work in different industries from aviation to motorsport, basically high risk industries. So, what I've got for you today is for us to look at why traditional safety approaches fail with experienced and independent workers. And I want to get you to go away with some tips. So the team have added in a digital takeaway with one of the 7 techniques that's applicable immediately that reduces polarization. And we're going to talk about what polarization actually is. And for us to discover 3 psychological triggers that create genuine behavioral change, and to identify opportunities for impact within our own teams. So let's have a look and see whether or not we can recognize exactly what's possible. So for us, this is really going to be terribly important. So we want to look at what's possible when the right strategies are applied in a systematic way. So first of all, by the end of this session, we'll see a clear path to changing the dynamic of internal behavioral polarization. But before we talk about that, really, what is polarization? If we think about polarization in the workplace, it's this bit where people feel that they are fixed. Individuals, humans, we don't really like to change. And so when we think about polarization in the workplace, it doesn't just divide teams. It quietly increases the level of risk within the organization. And this is especially important when it comes to experienced workers who we know from statistics actually already face a situation where we see higher injury rates. So, for example, in 2023, 2024, 34% of all fatal injuries were those among workers aged 60 and over. Now, why is this important for us? Well, they make up only 11% of the workforce, but when we think about their fixed views, their ways of seeing the world, they are still an important part of the workforce. And as we are all working later, we're all getting older when we're still working, we know that this is an important area of risk that we need to look at. And it can be used for other people as well, these techniques to behaviorally modify people. And this becomes incredibly important. We know that experience can, in essence, breed a level of confidence. And we see that in ourselves. But sometimes confidence exacerbates polarization and increases the level of risk. So we know that the risk is amplified amongst people who are self-employed, and these hidden cultural divides ultimately feed into the UK's annual cost of work-related ill health and workplace injuries, which is sitting at around £22 billion. So, experienced workers who are incredibly important to us in the workplace actually contribute significantly to this burden. So, for us, we want tools. I always say to people when we move away from the sessions that we do, whatever we do, we want to give people tools. Now, why is this important? If you think about the sectors that we work in, and you look at some of the highest risk industries that we see. So some examples that are on the screen, so pharmaceuticals and healthcare. If you look at the burnout risk associated with them, there's some real issues around stress and burnout rates in the UK, and these link with behaviors. So if you think about some of the issues around people's behaviors, we as humans do not like to change. And as I said, it links in with what Louise was talking about first thing, and exactly what Davy was talking about too. So all of these things like language, how we modify people's behavior, the risk appetite, the sustainability in the future of both organizations, but also everything else we do within the country. So for us, those risks are really important. So some different amounts of statistics here, looking at motorsport, 70% of motorsport personnel report burnout symptoms. And when we think about behaviors, they feed into those risks. And if you look at the data around these issues, they are really important issues in the workplace. So when I first started out in safety 20 odd years ago, actually the majority of the work that we did was safety. So we were health and safety people, but mainly we did safety. When you now look at the hazards that are creating the most risk within organizations and also the most working time lost, it all focuses around health. And so these are important things to consider, and also the well-being of our staff. So health and well-being become incredibly important. And there are some aggravating factors that we look at with longer work days. So, for example, in the logistics and transport sector, it has incredibly long work days with an average of 9 hours and 10 minutes, which is 26 minutes longer than across industry average. Now, we can learn some things between by looking at those cross-sector analytics. We can learn lots of things. So leaders have to manage workloads in high pressure environments, and this can contribute to their own risk. It can contribute to other people's risk. So managing culture, polarization, and burnout becomes incredibly important. So that is really important for us to understand how we do that. And as I said, if we've got great systems in place and the board are on board, as it were, with reference to understanding risk appetite, and everybody knows what they're doing, and there are gold-plated policies and procedures in place, we still have the issue of dealing with people. And we can't always look inside the mind of everybody when we're thinking about risk on a day-to-day basis. So we need to start understanding ourselves, and we need to start understanding the people who work for us. It's a big issue for us globally. The fact is, in high-risk sectors, managing human behavior is an incredibly important thing. Now, as Louise said, over the years, we've seen so many different things, and sometimes we go away from our careers and we reflect on what we've seen. And I have trained thousands of people over the years, and I have had interesting conversations with people. I've seen the responses from people, and I kind of look and think, well, what is it about human behavior that people don't get? And these are the key recognition points, or this problem recognition framework, which we've created to identify why our current approaches to managing human behavior within organizations often fail. So we want to agitate the issue and think about when we see those aha moments. So one of the key ones is we genuinely think people care as leaders and managers about what we've got to say. So I'm a manager in a business, I say you do this, you do that. Oh, by the way, I don't want you working all those extra hours. I want you to do this, 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 and this, but you're not with them. So in certain sectors where people are remote, and even post-COVID, where we still see quite a substantial amount of remote working, we believe we say something and we believe people care. And that is a misjudgment. People don't. They don't care about what we've got to say. So we need to find out what they do care about. So by the end of this session, what I want to try and do is give you a tool to improve human behavior. And it's one of many tools. It's one of 7 tools that we can use. We also believe that people understand what we say. Now, a long time training, many opportunities for me to interact with people and see how they approach practical exams and all of these kind of different things. And I remember back in the early days of training when I was delivering some low-level NEBOSH training in terms of the qualification levels. And I would have had 20 people, say, in a room. And I get back the practicals from these 20 people, and every single one of them is different. Now, initially, I'd be like, what are people doing in the room? What's going on? Were they even in the same room as me? I remember saying it out loud. Were they even in the same room as me? And then I realized that it's not their fault, it's mine. And so, one of those things about communication within organizations is that we have to understand that we cannot instantaneously believe that people understand what we say and for many different reasons. But we can talk about this, and we can talk about it all day, really, about people not understanding what we say. We also believe sometimes wrongly that people will behave like adults. In the workplace, people, they're grown up, they'll behave like adults, and we assume that that's going to be the case, but that is far from the case. And we believe that people will think like us. So I remember being 19, thinking the whole world thought the same way as me. And genuinely, that is not the case. And we also believe that people inherently trust us. Now, for you, you may be somebody who trusts people until they lose that trust from you, but a lot of people don't. So these are some of the issues that we see when we think about the problems that we face. And this is why everything we've tried with people hasn't worked. So we think about the why, the who, the how, and all of these kind of bits and pieces, but we also need to understand people's personal motivations. So it's a really interesting point when we think about human behavior, because we want people to be onboarded. We want people to understand our culture. We spend time creating governance strategies, linking to what Louise was talking about earlier. We spend time trying to train people. Think about all the energy and enthusiasm that Davey brings to the training when he's thinking about manual handling. We do this, and then sometimes we miss the mark and we don't understand why. So for us, it's linking in to everything that we've done so far within the round table. So the other thing we have to consider is that when we're thinking about behavioural polarisation, people being fixed at a point, we have to understand how human beings actually are. So if we have a perceived freedom, even if it's not real, but we perceive it's a freedom. So for me, I perceive that I can drive wherever I want to drive, however fast I want to drive, for example. That is a perception. It's not reality, but it's a perception. If I perceive that freedom is being threatened, psychologically, as a human, I will react. Now, some of you will remember being a teenager and thinking about your parents saying, right, Carla, you must be back at 10 o'clock. You need to be home by 10 o'clock, etc., etc. And that reactance, so that's a threat to my perceived freedom, will mean I will behave in a way that will do whatever I can to restore that level of freedom. So if we think about polarization, we can easily become polarized when we perceive that our freedom is being threatened. And we will try anything we can as individuals to restore that freedom. And it's interesting when we look at how this gets delivered. So we spend a lot of time running behavioral modification programs and health and safety training in general, and writing tailored programs for organization about tweaks to behavioral change, tweaks to modifying the individual's behaviors within the organization. And you see this by passive aggressive nature of people. They will say, oh, you know what, I had a trainer yesterday and they were rubbish. And you're be like, why? Why were they rubbish? Because they didn't actually, curtail to their way of seeing the world. And people have a particular way of seeing the world. And the older that we get, the more polarized we become, the more our attitudes are difficult, they're entrenched and more difficult to change. So we need to find how we deal with this, because if I say, because I said so, as a leader or a manager, that can create more polarization because of the theory of reactance. And it's a really interesting thing when people are independently minded, how we look at this and how we try to move this forward. So sometimes we talk about competence, and in safety, we talk about competence a lot, but also sometimes familiarity, and that competence or that perceived competence can become the enemy of safety and the enemy of risk management. So growing experience can weirdly and ironically lead to a level of decreased safety awareness and increased risk-taking behaviors, as well as polarization. So for us, we think, oh, you know what? We've got lots of these people in the workplace. They can show the new people coming in. They're the ones who know the systems and all the rest of it. But they may have shortcuts, and they may have developed these entrenched shortcuts that actually increase the level of risk that you don't even know about. So our behaviors within the organization is going to be really important. We also know there is a really different mindset between generations that's actually not existed in the way it exists before. And that's from the development of technology, also the development of the way people perceive the world. There is a huge divide in the way generations think about work, they think about safety, and they think about risk. And there's a lack of understanding between people who are over 60 to people who are under 20. Like there's such a difference. And so when we think about we think about experience, sometimes we think, oh, you know what, that person is experienced. But you think about it in yourself. If you think about yourself, what do you do now that's more risky than you did when you were younger? Or do you do something slightly different? And do you actually see any or recognize any of these patterns in your team? So, who recognizes any patterns like this in their team? So it's really interesting how to think about what we need to do. And we want to give you solutions. We want to give you tools to be able to talk to your staff, join them together, think about change, what this actually looks like, what that actually looks like to improve risk management within an organization. So first of all, we want to think about what is the breakthrough. So what actually drives true behavioral change? First of all, we have to understand that people don't like change. So if we shift the focus from internal motivation to the environment, so if we think about Vroom's theory of motivation, if we tell people how, why, what, where, and when, etc., unless they're personally motivated to change, you've got hell or no chance. Our aha moment is the realization that willpower and motivation are unreliable, as are humans. And I spend so much of my time saying humans are inherently prone to failure. And instead of us trying to be more disciplined, if you think about giving up smoking or going on a diet, the breakthrough insight for us, and this is really useful in organizations in terms of culture, and this again fits into what Louise was talking about and what Davey's talking about, is to design the environment to make the desired behavior the natural path of least resistance. Less resistance, less polarization. Because people are reactive, and they will step up to secure and challenge anyone who tries to take away their perceived freedoms. So if we've got an environment that makes the desired behavior the natural path of least resistance, if you think about human beings, we like the path of least resistance, it becomes natural. and it becomes less polarized. So we want to make sure that we think about safe place before safe people. And that fits with all the things that we know traditionally in occupational health and safety, but it is a breakthrough because it tells us to make sure that we always remember the thing about people don't care, people are selfish, people are self-focused, and that's a natural cognitive thing. It's not always focused on the now. It's subconscious. It's not something, Louise was talking about defense cognition. It's something that happens naturally in humans. So if we have less resistance, we can achieve less polarization, which means that there's less separation between that generation, and everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet, which is what we want in an organization. Last year I did a course on behavioural modification with some groups of people over in New Zealand and Australia, and we were talking about data, and they were saying, that Generation Z has an attention span of around 20 seconds. So when we're thinking about dealing with people, we need to think about how they perceive what we're trying to say to them and how they will process the information that we're giving them. So instead of trying to be more disciplined, the breakthrough insight is to design the environment. So think about safe place. How can we make everything the natural path to least resistance? It's really important. Now, if we think about those psychological triggers that create human change, first of all, we have to think about the why. So motivation is a really important part of this. So if you think about motivation in general, what is your why? So the best way for us to be thinking about it is what's important to you. And I spend so much time talking to people about this. I remember when I first started working, and I worked with my parents for a while, and my dad would always say to me, know thy stuff. Understand them, understand what motivates people. So if something motivates you, maybe it's time off, maybe it's money, maybe it's a bit of sunshine. Is that the same for other people? And the answer to that is always going to be no. Everybody has something different that motivates them. So finding their why is a really important thing to understand. Also, if you give people capability and ability to do something, that is going to enable them to feel confident. This bolsters, this bit about Davy said the word empowerment. Davy, I wrote that down, the word empowerment, because it's a really important one that we use, and it's a completely applicable here. So I know that over the years I've trained people, I've gone off to do maybe risk assessment training with people. I've developed all this lovely course, and I get on the course and somebody says, oh, yes, I've worked in the organization for like 44 years, but nobody's ever asked me, or nobody's ever shown me how to do risk assessment properly. And that person may be upset, they may be stressed. But if you want somebody to change, you need to give them the capability and ability to be able to do that. And it's a really important thing, give people the tools, give people the motivation, find it, link it all together. The importance of human behavior is it cannot be underestimated. If we think about the unsafe acts and unsafe conditions and the immediate causes of accidents, we still see that 90% or around about 90% of all incidents occur because of some unsafe act. And if this is the case, if we've got gold-plated systems and we've got this and we've got that and we've got, governance structures and we've got all of these kind of things, but the people don't have what they need to be able to do the job they're paid to do, that is a real problem. So it is rarely wasted. Time spent on building capability and ability to be able to do things is incredibly important. Same for this week. I've been out at a customer, and I go in. I've got 20 people in the training, and I ask them. So they're asking you to do incident investigation. Okay, do you know how to do that? I asked them, do you know how to do that? Have you ever been trained how to do that? And they go, no. So how do you know how to do incident investigation? Well, we don't, we guess. Oh, well, it's common sense, isn't it? I love that. It's common sense, isn't it? How to do an instant investigation. And you're not giving people the tools. And the other thing that we need to do is make sure that we give them the opportunity. So again, there's no point in going into an organization and saying, right, I'm going to go and train you in tailored risk assessment training, and then we don't give them the opportunity to be able to use that skill. So you use it or lose it. We all know that if you're riding a bike or riding a horse, you learn something, and then all of a sudden, if you don't use it, you often lose that skill. So where is the when, and where is the opportunity to incite that behavioral change? So there's just some triggers that we can use, and also a system that we can use. And we ask ourselves, do we have those three things in place that the magic treble, the MCOs, do we have them in place to be able to incite change? Again, it's incredibly important that when we're thinking about management of change within organization, that we provide this pathway. So one of the things I really wanted to do was give you some tools. So if I think about the 7 kind of tools that I've got for changing and transforming safety culture by focusing on human behavior, I'll give you one complete technique. And this is a peer credibility conversation framework. And we call this the CBIC model. And some of you may have seen this before, but it can have dramatic results, and it's included in your digital goodie bag. So how do we use this in practice? What does this actually look like? If we're thinking about how we converse with people and when you want something done, if you say, I told you so, is that going to work? Now we know all of those things about human behavior, the reactance model. And these are tools that you can go away and use straight away within your organization. The days of you will do it, you're afraid of me, get it sorted are done, and doesn't work when it comes to risk. And even if people are not able to communicate managing risk in the same way that we would at this level, it doesn't matter. They understand it, even if they can't communicate it in the way that we would. So we need to work with people. So if we want something to change, the first thing is what we would do with them is we would look at the situation, and we would describe to them the situation that we see. So, hey, Alex, can I talk to you for a moment? This morning around 10:30, I noticed something when you were in the yard at the east side of the building. So you set the situation, you set the scene. Then you talk about the behavior. No, we think that we understand behavior. What we really want to do is understand what preceded the behavior, but we don't always get the opportunity to see the antecedent. So we don't always get the opportunity to see what precedes a behavior. We would like to know, we would want to know, but we don't always know what that is. And if we want to incite true change, understanding the antecedent becomes really important too. But we put here, I saw you climb the ladder to reach the back of the transporter, and you didn't have your safety harness clipped on. So very simple. I've described to that person their behavior. There's no angst, there's no emotion here, there's no aggression. We're just being lovely and calm. And then you're describing impact. Now, again, I've ringed this. The impact becomes important. So again, Davey, he said it. The reason why we do multiple programs over a period of time and we work with people is you could go in and deliver a fantastic training course, but how do you keep the momentum going? So impact becomes really important. And this is the bit that becomes emotional. So we know that people will change more if we can find their motivation. Not being seriously injured or killed is a motivation. So I don't go to work on a day-to-day basis to be seriously injured or killed. I'd like to keep my bits, my mental sanity, and I'd like to be alive. And everybody else usually would too, unless they're suffering in some other way. But we explain to somebody about the impact and the behavior. And we think about how they are going to think, and we also think about the emotion surrounded by that. So I felt concerned when I saw you, basically, when I saw that because of a fall from height, it could cause a serious injury. What was going through your mind? Was there a reason that you weren't clipped on? I felt concerned when I saw that could happen. And then what you want to be able to do is then work together. So if you work in isolation, actually you are not collaborating. And if you think about the model for improving culture, collaboration is part of that. So getting people's buy-in is it becomes incredibly important. So for everybody's safety, including yours, we really need to make sure that everyone is clipped on 100% of the time up there. Can I count on you to do that? So at that point, you're asking for assurance that that's going to happen. And if you see an issue with the equipment again, let's fix it right away together before you start the task. Now, this is not going to work in every situation, and there are other tools that we can use as well. But the word influence comes into the equation. And again, I have written that down. I have talked about how we can modify behavior, but the word influence becomes incredibly important. I think that we can know everything when it comes to safety. We can know all of the technicalities and we could be encyclopedic. And sometimes for some of us, that is something that we are. But unless you have the ability to charm and influence as a manager or a leader, you're going to find it really difficult to incite any kind of change because change is painful for human beings. On average, it takes hundreds often of days for people to change, just one thing. So people don't like change. So if we work with people, collaborate with people, and provide things like social proof and reduced psychological defense, that defense mechanism in them, Louise was talking about it earlier. People go on the defensive, and we want to stop that. If you go around saying, "Oi, sort that out," you're doing something unsafe, oi, sort it out. It just doesn't work. We know it doesn't work because we see the responses. You turn around and somebody's moaning about you behind your back. So it becomes really important. So, in terms of the vision casting that we want to kind of incite and the clear road ahead, we know that there are 4 techniques that include step-by-step techniques to transform human behavior. I mentioned the bit about the antecedent, so understanding what that looks like in terms of modifying behavior. So, what precedes the behavior becomes really important in terms of safety culture. And also is important when it comes to polarization, especially of demographics of staff within the organization, grouping together and being polarized one opinion. Thinking about people saying, "Oh, you know what? The managers around here, you're only in doing safety training because they just want to cover themselves." And what creates that polarization? Really understanding, asking the questions to people, but as well as asking the questions, also creating a situation where you can follow up and make that effective change. And there are 6 additional techniques that we can use to transform safety culture. And companies that have implemented similar techniques, whilst they have everything else in place, governance structures, policies and procedures, systems, maybe they have an ISO standard, and they're still seeing really silly incidents occurring, and people are doing root cause analysis and saying that person was a bit of an idiot that day and all the rest of it badly. They're doing root cause analysis badly if that's the case. But if we want to dramatically cut incidents and increase performance, then we want to be able to implement some of these tools. We know, and I'll refer back to that statistic of unsafe acts cause around 90% of incidents. So if that is the case, that we know that we need to spend time and energy and our money on making sure that humans behave in the way that we want them to within the workplace. So if you look here, there's a note on here saying about Pfizer Grange Castle, who reported a 1,600% increase in positive safety interventions over a three-year period. Some of the organizations we work with call them points of engagement. You're having a conversation, you're having a safety conversation with a colleague, and you can use all of these techniques and tools to transform behavior. And okay, change doesn't happen overnight, it's slow, but with major improvements in ownership and also hazard identification and leadership engagement, alongside cultural accountability and decreased polarization, most organizations and the leaders within them will see measurable change within the first 30 days if they use all of the 7 techniques. So today, you've just would have learned one of those 7 techniques for behavioral change and to reduce polarization. So remember, change is fundamentally possible. I think that's really important to remember too. So change is definitely possible. Now, what we have done is we have included a lovely digital takeaway. Ah, Christian, I've put your lovely face on the screen there too, because Christian is coming up soon. So I'm going to introduce Christian Harris, but before I do that, I'm just going to say that we have, and I've done quite well. I've given Christian plenty of time. We've got plenty of time for our round table. We've included the solution preview as a digital takeaway for you in the pack. So I want to introduce the lovely Christian Harris. He is the founder and CEO of Slip Safety Services, and he is a leading UK authority on preventing slip-related accidents with over a decade of experience in risk management. Through his organization, Safety and Risk Success, and his podcast, he has helped global leaders in sectors like hospitality and healthcare reduce incidents and lower insurance costs. Well done, Christian. I've known Christian for a long time now. He's very, very good indeed. And he's a data-driven advocate for transparency. And his mission is to redefine safety performance and make the world a safer, one floor at a time. I'm loving that. Now, I'm hoping you'll all make 2026 your safest year yet. So I've been Carla Crocombe, and I'm the founder and managing director of Safety Rocks, and we've been rocking safety since 2015. Over to you, Christian.
Thank you, Carla. I don't know if anybody's got any quick questions for Carla because we are running well within our time limit. So if anybody does have a question, and they want to be brave and raise their hand, then we'd be very happy to have you come and talk. Let's see if
I
there's anything in the chat.
I am going to yeah, I've just stopped sharing so that we can take
Okay,
any
lovely.
questions. Is that I'll have a look in the chat as well. I've been trying to look at some of the chat as we've been going along. Absolutely brilliant. What I was also trying to do was to link in with everybody else, and I know Christian, you'll do exactly the same. There is definitely a theme about today, and that behavioural, human behaviour part is incredibly important. Somebody's put about what about accountability as a trigger? It would be interesting if you describe more about what you mean by that in terms of accountability, in terms of a trigger, and in terms of so did that not work? Could you not see the slides very well?
We could see the slides. It was a little bit, yeah, I think maybe it was in, I don't know, speaker mode or something. But yeah, we could see the slides.
Okay, we will, by the way, also we will send them to you as well, so you've got a copy of the slides. So you could do like Louise said earlier, if you message me on LinkedIn and you put in their behavior in the chat, I'll send them over to you as well. So that's absolutely fine too.
Good stuff. Yeah, Louise, go ahead.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your both the presentations. What an amazing set of webinars we're having. I just wanted to pick up, and it might actually answer the question about accountability as a trigger. So one of the things that you said in your presentation, Carla, was, we can have all the governance in the world, but actually we still need behaviors. I'd kind of challenge that a little to say, in order for organizations, and what you do is incredible and important, and it's all about modern safety leadership practice, but that takes a direction shift of organizations, and it's, I'd almost say that's probably a board level, we're going to do things differently. And so that really comes back down to that, if we don't have a strategic mandate to approach things in an organizational wide manner, we kind of miss the trick. We become siloed as safety professionals, and that's when I see, safety as being a technical issue, rather than a strategic issue which is embedded across the organization.
It's an interesting one. So I can use an example from this week. So I have gone into an organization that has got some of the best governance structures that I've ever seen. So they've got they've got a risk working group, they've got a strategic leadership risk group, that the structure is there. So structurally, their governance is spot on. But when you speak to the people on the ground, they don't understand the governance structures for starters. So they don't get like, what's this forum for? What does that actually do? What's my role in that? So that there's the disconnect about communication. And this is what we're saying about all of these techniques and tools are about communication. If we think about the 4 C's, Louise, control, communication, competency, cooperation, all of those things. When I say you can have the best governance structures in the world, what I actually mean is structure. So you can have gold-plated structures, and somebody's put about the accountability bit. The senior management team are accountable. We've been at a social housing organization, and there's a new social housing act which says, the CEO is the safety leader, etc., etc. When you look at those people, they're great. They've got the governance structures and all the rest of it, but there is a huge disconnect between that and the conversations that they have with people. It's almost like they don't know how to have the conversations with people. And so the toolkit, the 7 steps to behavioral modification, is almost designed for the people who don't know how to have those conversations. And we expect people will have charm and influence, but my goodness, what the safety profession is like, Louise. There are the good ones and the people that are good at charm and influence, and there are the really bad ones.
Yeah, and I would challenge that's a good governance structure.
Yes.
Because you may have a structure, and I've been into organizations that have great structures, but the governance, it's not about structure, it's about what goes, modern governance should be fluid. And it's, we're moving into a new world of governance now where it's, in the past, it's been company secretariat. Am I ticking the right boxes to have the right discussions? But actually, we're moving on from that. And so I would challenge that those organizations have good governance structures,
yeah.
because actually, and it goes back to my comments about the choice chain. So
Yes.
or leaders need to make choices that are quite hard to make because it involves change, which comes back to everything that you're saying.
So we have so many conversations about risk appetite. So I was at Manchester recently and we talked about risk appetite. And when you talk to leaders about the conversation, or when you talk to leaders about appetite for the level of risk, they push it onto safety professionals, and they will say to us, you're the safety professional. What does that mean? What does appetite got to do with us? Well, I'm sorry, you're the people who decide what risk you're willing to take in order to be able to create the commercial activity that you're getting paid to do. And obviously, you're the ones who make those final decisions around the who are accountable for those decisions. So you have to, as a senior management team, decide how much appetite you're willing to take in order for commercial gain. But the problem is often that's pushed onto the safety professionals to make those decisions, because the board and senior leadership team don't understand that they are responsible for making those decisions. You can take as much risk as you like, but you decide it, you write it down, and you tell your team, right? So that everybody else knows how much risk you're willing to take. It's not for the safety professionals to do that, but you have to communicate it. And the thing is, with some of the conversations that we have with people, they just don't have the right conversations. So we get people who will go, I have no idea what the senior leadership team want from us. We're so disconnected from the board. We don't really understand. So we'll just do what we like. And that's where polarization comes in.
It's
because
it's so that's when the governance structure becomes misaligned. And the other point that I'm always looking at how do we get the leadership right? So ERM did some research a while ago where they, and I need to get the reference for this, where they interviewed a wide range of safety professionals in big organizations. And the number one issue that came up again and again was the capacity, so the cognitive overload
Mm.
and the capability of leadership teams. And so this lends itself back to the language that we use to help and support them in the task that they've got, because they don't understand it, and so it
No.
gets simplified.
And also that capability and the cognitive ability and that then proliferates throughout the whole organization, because
100%.
language, I wrote language. I'm laughing at myself because I scribble down on pieces of paper what you wrote, what Davey wrote today. But language is incredibly important. If you're talking to a board about risk and they don't understand what risk is in the first place, I will genuinely guarantee 90% of the time I have conversations with board members who don't know what risk actually is. And so if that's the case, how can you then communicate that to anybody else? How does anybody know how much risk you're willing to take? So that bit about human connection and those skills, you're saying earlier, they're not soft. They are not soft. They are the things that make us good. They are power. They are like your superpower, like Louise Hoskins' superpower, charm and influence. It is so true, because if we can communicate and make and simplify these things so people can understand them at all levels and everybody works together, that's when we see huge, substantial cultural changes. And some of those things can happen really quickly if we teach people how to talk to people. So, Louise, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. I love it. I love
Carla
it.
and I could talk all day, so you better interrupt
Yeah,
us,
quick, Christian, stop us
Yeah,
talking.
I'll dive in. We can resume our discussion in the panel in a minute. So thank you so much, Carla. That was great. And